Okay, so in this exercise we're going to begin talking about scenes. Now we've used layout before to view objects and to make bitmaps, but the most important thing that you can do in layout is actually create whole scenes which have multiple objects in that. So that's what we're going to start doing now. So here is our layout screen, and once again I usually start in perspective view. So there's our studio. One camera, one light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one of the objects that we created in the previous exercise. So if I go to load object, and right there on the desktop I've got my floor. I'm going to load the floor first. And notice that the floor is pretty big, and I'm even going to make it bigger than that. So basically I'm going to go to modify, and I'm going to go to size, and there, that's probably big enough. And while we're here, if I go into camera view, I can see that the camera is looking right on the edge of that floor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera. So down here I'm going to select cameras instead of objects. There's only one camera, and I'm going to move as selected. I'm going to right hand click and pull that up some, so that the camera's kind of looking down. And then I'm just going to rotate it so the camera kind of looks down on it, and move it up some more as well. And I can do this a few times, and we'll adjust this when everything is finished. And there we are. And get this light out of the way there. Okay, so that becomes our floor, sort of. So we're going to add load object, and I'm going to bring in the ball first. So there's the ball. And the ball is very tiny. I go into perspective view, and I go to move, and that's actually okay. So now that we have that for scale, what we're going to do, because we wanted the big floor for a reason, we're going to go back to camera view, and we're going to bring the camera to where it can be useful. So I'm going to move the camera. I'm going to go back to camera view. I'm going to move the camera in on that. Oh, it's rotating. So I'm going to move the camera in on that and bring it down, and in, and down. Eventually I get to the point where I'm actually through the ball there. So I'm just going to bring it down a little bit more and then sort of rotate it up a little bit. And that's actually getting us almost what we're looking for. So turn back to move, and I'm going to go in on just a little bit more. Oh, back up. So now we have our ball. So if I select the ball, here's where it gets a little bit interesting. I can move the ball around using the arrows, and if I begin to move the ball down, you see there's a point at which the ball disappears. That's where it hits the table. So basically what I want to do is I want to find out about where that is and put it sort of on the table. So then move it back a little bit into 3D space, and I'm actually going to make it a little bit bigger. So if I go to size, just make that a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to move it up some, and that should be good for now. So now if I bring in the jacks, and there's the jack. Now the jacks are supposed to be smaller than the ball, but that's a little bit too small. So I'm going to size them up some. Sort of like that. And the same thing with the ball, we want those on the table. And in this case, if I try to put that on the table, it's going to look kind of silly because it's balancing on that little pin there. So I'm going to rotate it some. So rotate it so that it looks more realistic. Let's say that would be good. So I could do the same thing with all the other jacks, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to items here, and I'm just going to clone this. See, there's a clone feature here, and basically I'm going to clone the current item, and I want, say, 5 copies of that. So once I've done that, nothing appears to have changed, except if I move that over, there we go. And then there's another one. I think it's this one. There. 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 Okay, and so then to make that look a little bit more normal, I'm going to go into rotate, and I'm going to rotate some of those at random so they aren't all facing the same way. Oops, forgot about that one. So I'm going to move that one, say back there a little bit. Rotate that again. And move it that way a little bit. And just do another rotation on that, let's say. And there you go. So we now have jacks on the floor. So if we're going to actually make this scene useful, we're going to have to work on the surfaces a little bit. First thing we're going to do is save the scene. The scene is not the objects. The scene is a collection of objects organized in a certain way. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to call that jacks on the desktop. And so now let's see what this actually looks like. So to do that, I'm going to hit the F9 button. And now that we've done that, we can see that the scene includes shadows and highlights. And so basically we got a ball and some jacks. And that is essentially a good start. So there we go. We got a ball and some jacks, but what we want to do is we want to make some of those more realistic. So let's go over to Surface Editor. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the floor. And so the floor's default surface is that gray color. Now I could change that. Let's say I make that kind of a blue floor. And we could do that if we wanted to, but I'm thinking we want this to look more like a wood grain floor. And so to do that, all we have to do is download some wood grain. And so you can download textures all you want for a wood grain. So let's say we like this one. That's nice solid wood grain. So what I want to do is I want to put this onto that surface. And so there's a very easy way to do that. And what we're going to do is under the color, we're just going to go all the way over here to the little T button. And when we do that, we get this texture editor. So essentially, we're going to map that wood onto that texture. So what we're going to do is under projection here, we're going to choose, we'll start with planar, see if that works. And we're going to load an image. And so I'm going to grab that wood image that I found. And there it is. And suffice it to say, I don't think it's done it correctly yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit automatic sizing and see if we can actually see that wood grain. And it looks like, if you can look over here, you can see it looks like a cross section. Let's try choosing it on a different axis. The y-axis looks like it might work, and that's probably the one we want to use. So let's say that I go with that, I say use texture. Now we have a wood grain finish. And let's see how that renders out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F9. and you can see that the wood grain is in fact there. What I want to do is I want to make that more of a polished wood. I want to put a nice shine on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over back to Surface Editor, and we've got the texture on there, and I'm going to add a little bit of specularity to it, a little highlight there, and a little bit of glossiness, not a whole lot of glossiness. And I'm going to also add some reflection. So what this will do is it will begin to reflect objects in it. So that will produce like a nice wood grain surface. And let's go ahead and see how that renders. I'll hit F9 again. And you can see that now we've got a little bit of reflection there, and maybe a little too much, but we'll go with it anyway. So that's our nice wood grain. And so what I want to do is add a little bit of texture to that. So I'm going to go back to the Surface Editor, and I'm going to go stay on the floor now. And if we go to this first texture here, just going to make a note of where that is. That's on the y-axis, and we did automatic sizing, so don't need to do that. So I'm going to go down here to where it says bump, and I'm going to basically give that wood kind of a three-dimensional quality. So I'm going to go to texture again, and projection, planar, image, same one. So that wooden image. I'm going to go to the y-axis and hit automatic sizing. And under texture amplitude, I'm going to bump that up a little bit. Let's see if that works. Maybe just a wee bit more. I'm going to use the texture, and what that should do is modify that glossiness just a little bit. So I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to go ahead and render this again. So if we look at this, we have more of a texture there, and I would say that maybe we went a little bit too far, put a little bit too much bumpiness there. So I'm going to bring that down by about half. So if we go to Surface Editor and go back to the bump map, instead of 3, let's bring that down to, say, 1.5. And we'll try that again. And looking at this, I would say that that's actually pretty realistic looking. We'll go ahead and stick with that. So let's look at our jacks. Go to the Surface Editor and look at our jacks. Our jacks are basically white. So what we want to do is let's see if we can give that kind of a metallic look. So maybe we'll make that a little bit grayer, let's say. And we want to add a lot of specularity and a lot of glossiness, because these are metal. And let's say that we make them completely reflective. So these are going to reflect everything around them. They're going to be like mirrors. So let's see what that would do for this. Okay, so if we start recording, we see they don't look a whole lot different from this angle, but essentially that's believable as jacks. Now we could add a metal surface to that by just grabbing an image of metal or manipulate the color a little bit more, but basically let's say that for now that's okay. Now the ball, the only thing we got to do there is you can still see some of those geometric shapes in there. So let's go ahead and go to Surface Editor and go with the ball. And with this, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and turn on smoothing, get rid of that excess geometry, give it a little bit of speculation. It's kind of specularity. That's kind of like what a ball looks like. We won't use any glossiness here, at least not much. Maybe take that down a little bit, so like a rubber ball. And no reflection, because rubber balls don't reflect. We could go with surfaces, but not now. Let's just go ahead and leave it like that. Let's look at the color again. The red rubber ball. What would kind of like a dark red usually is what those might look like. And maybe a little bit more glossiness. And let's see how that renders. So if you look at this now, we've got ball looks much better and the jacks are reasonably good. We're kind of losing the jacks though. We can make those jacks a little darker, so let's try that. So if I go into Surface Editor, go to the jacks, and let's just go ahead and make that, it was kind of more of a dull gray. How about, yeah, like that. And so the same other characteristics. And we're also going to frame the shot a little bit better. So I'm going to go down here into camera mode. I'm going to move this a little closer and rotate down just a little bit more so we're looking more at the scene. Move ahead some and rotate down a little bit more. Move ahead a little more. And like that, let's say. So now we're looking down at the scene, and we also want to increase the resolution there. So I'm going to go into the Render tab, go into Render Globals, and instead of 640 by 480, I'm going to make that, say, 1000 by, let's say, 500. Let's see what that does. And if you look at the viewing angle here, that's going to give us a rectangle. So let's say we want to do that for now, but I want to just move that camera in such a way that it looks more dynamic. And let's say that we were going to have words or something up here, so that'll be good enough for now. And we'll go ahead and render that. Okay, so as you can see, this is it's a little bit better, and we have a nice, good rendering. So this will be our finished product. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this, save RGB. And in this particular case, I'm going to use PNG 24 because there isn't any need for transparency here. We have no background to block out. And we'll put that up as jacks. And there we have our finished product. So as you can see, there's plenty of room for improvement here, but the essential elements are there. And so with this technique, you can create all kinds of amazing scenes.